to non-violently disarm the war machine, and a jury decided unanimously that though it was damage, it was not criminal or without lawful excuse, and they spoke with one voice, and that voice says to London, it says to DC, it says to Dublin, that Irish people do not want any part of this war. Because the beautiful thing about the jury system is that it's not 12 experts, it's 12 people randomly chosen from the community who make up the conscience of the community. In our case, the conscience spoke with one voice. I have a relationship to this area. It's a bit tenuous, but my brother was a nurse here for a couple of years, and he also nursed in Kalkaringi. I believe I'm the only person in the history of the Northern Territory prison system who got a haircut during my imprisonment for disabling uranium mining equipment. So that was one little victory to go with all our glorious defeats. It's been great to be able to come out here again. And also, having known, I met Brian and Jim in police custody back in 1978. When we were being denounced as, whatever we've been denounced by Joe Bielke-Peterson then, but usually our only crime is that we're ahead of our time, because handing out leaflets, gathering in 3 or more people, marching, picketing, which were all illegal activities under Joe. And then, after the Fitzgerald inquiry, when 5 of his ministers were imprisoned, when the police commissioner got 14 years, when it was exposed that there was a relationship between a police force willing to suppress civil liberties and a government willing to turn a blind eye to their involvement in organised crime, those people who spoke up and acted non-violently and courageously were just guilty of being ahead of their time, And it's ironic when I recall in 1977, one of the first acts of civil disobedience I was involved in was actually blockading a uranium shipment to Iran, to the Shah of Iran. I remember a member of the National Party government coming out to our university campus, and I said to him, look, this stuff remains dangerous and radioactive for hundreds of thousands of years. Don't you think the Shah looks a bit unstable? What if it falls into the wrong hands? And he assured us, no, the Shah was totally stable. And of course, within 6 months, the Shah collapsed, and we're going to go to a war based on what they're doing with our uranium now. And we've been sold this war on 3 lies. The first lie, that was a war against weapons of mass destruction, that Saddam Hussein was a threat in the 1990s to his neighbours. Now, the only time Saddam Hussein was ever a threat was when the British and American governments were arming him, when the Irish government was selling beef on credit to invade his neighbour Iran following the fall of the Shah. He was no threat to his neighbours in the 1990s. The only weapon of mass destruction that existed in Iraq at that point were the genocidal UN sanctions, or UN sanctions that were first put up to get Saddam out of Kuwait and were successful, but the US hijacked them and then talked about WMD and went on to kill 1 million children under the age of 5, according to UNESCO. And Madeleine Albright, who was the Liberal, one of Clinton's women, hang on, I better rephrase that, one of Clinton's careerists, who was the US ambassador to the UN, when she was confronted on 60 Minutes in 1996 with the statistic that 500,000 children died at that point, she responded with a genocidal response, we think that's worth the price. Okay? And she was shortly promoted to be Secretary of State. Now, Madeleine Albright in Time magazine past July, came out and referred to the US foreign policy in Iraq as the greatest disaster in American history. So people can change. They can transform. They can change. And we all need change, None of us is the finished product. No action. This 1 December, ours at Ciaron, is a definitive statement. The other ways we've marketed this war, but now they've forgotten about WMD, because obviously after occupying the place for 3 years and finding none, that's not a good war. So we've been told retrospectively the real reason we went to war is that it's a war on terrorism. And there was no jihadist terrorist base in Iraq in the 1990s, but now there is. We have created a swampland for terrorism and for revenge and for payback. And when I meet people in Ireland who went to London in the 80s, 70s, 80s and 90s and bombed London and took out the Stock Exchange and nearly wiped out the British government at Downing Street and at Brighton during the conference, and you talk to these people who are now teachers, who are now studying for the priesthood, who are now raising their children, who are not barbarians or animals, but you talk to these people who did that kind of thing and, usually gave a 40-minute warning or whatever, but they still killed innocent people, even though they might have tried not to. And you ask them what motivated you to risk years in jail, to be probably killed in the shoot-to-kill policy, and they will tell you what motivated them was foreign forces coming into their homes where they'd been raised and nourished and trashing the place that they grew up in by beating up their parents, imprisoning their brothers and sisters, and killing their neighbours. Now, did they have any hope of driving the British military out of the north of Ireland through this campaign? Probably not. But what motivated them was a sense of payback and vengeance. And as a Christian, I believe payback and vengeance goes nowhere. I think as a non-violent activist, you always have to maintain the initiative. And when they bring us to court, as they brought these 4 people, we don't go depressed and isolated and fearful. We use it as an opportunity to come back to the scene of the crime as we have today. And I want to thank people for respecting the Christian traditions that these activists come from. We know not everyone is a Christian. We know that people are multi-faith or no faith at all. And it's a really respectful thing that you're not so uptight that you've worked out at coming here. Because out of all our traditions, beautiful symbols arise that need to be celebrated. And whatever works for you spiritually, you know, whether it's Buddhism or Protestantism or Catholicism or paganism or the pixies at the end of the garden or a walk in the rainforest, really explore that. Because, you know, as this war continues, more of us will be before the courts and in their prisons when they slam that door. It's your spirituality and the solidarity of others that will get you through. I spent 13 months in jail in the United States after disarming a B-52 bomber in the First War. They put me on Conair, they shackled me hands, waist and legs, and they dropped me in El Paso on the border of Texas, and then shipped me 8 hours into the outback, where I was the only gringo in the jail, the only first world white boy. And I was in a cage with 23 other men, and the first month was very, very difficult. Both the staff didn't like my politics, and usually when you're in jail, it's young guys proving themselves, which is the problem. Serious criminals don't usually give you a problem. And it was only the amount of mail I got there. I got 1,900 letters in 9 months. So we got to hold up our people before the courts, got to support them, and the more solidarity there is, the easier the resistance is going to be. Because we're at the beginning of a very long war. It hasn't kicked off even in Iraq yet. Once the Americans bomb Iran, the Shiites will rise up against Australian and British troops, and the South have had a fairly soft time so far. And the war will continue to escalate because the Pakistani secret police are supporting the Taliban. The Taliban are getting financed by the Kuwaiti and Saudi royal families. That is not over. You know, they are losing the war militarily. And this base, what's scary about it, and I advise you to read a theologian, Walter Wink, who talks about principalities and powers. But this place claims to be omnipotent, okay? If you read Foucault, you know, he reflected that before the prison systems they built in the 1850s, the only one who could see everything was this God, however you define that. But now they believe they can see everything through these eyes in this place and this message, and it serves the role of messengers of death. It's hard to imagine on this beautiful day out here where it's so quiet that information from this base is destroying homes and killing people in other lands. But that's the kind of world we live in. We've got to get our head around it. Thank you.